So let's start with, I guess, the central piece of the show, the production design, which is her incredible sort of Vegas apartment, I mean house actually, mansion. What did you build it? Did you find it? Sort of let's get into the detail on that central location.
Sure. We knew from the very beginning that we were going to build the majority of the interior of her mansion on stage, coming straight out of the height of the pandemic in 2020. We just really wanted to have a controlled environment for the safety of the crew and the actors. And given the amount of days we'd be filming inside the mansion, it just made sense to create it as a build. So I started by doing a ton of research and creating mood boards on styles that I thought were appropriate to Deborah, because essentially this was a French chateau in the middle of a desert. So it was already an anomaly of contrast. So it kind of opened up the door of, I didn't necessarily need to research a Las Vegas estate and find the one that Deborah would have picked. She built this. So I was really able to kind of just throw open the gates and collect references from the US Embassy in Paris and chateaus in the south of France, and really just kind of create a mood board that I thought was the way Deborah would have done it. Many trips to Europe, collecting research, artifacts, architectural preferences, and really thinking that I get to work with my construction team, much like Deborah would have worked with her architect and design team. We did know that obviously we weren't going to be building the exterior of her mansion. So we started doing a pretty in-depth search in Los Angeles for that exterior that could double as a Las Vegas exterior. And again, because of the contrast of the chateau and a desert surround, it kind of did allow us to have a little bit of flexibility and cinematic license. I did research on neighborhoods that Deborah would live in Las Vegas. And I really kind of settled in on this one area in Summerlin called the Enclave. Her neighbors would have been Steve Wynn, David Copperfield. It's unofficially called Billionaires Row. And each house is bespoke to the owner in this private enclave. So, Steve Wynn's previous estate is this like Italianate Mediterranean. David Copperfield's is a contemporary. So it seemed perfect to me that Deborah Chateau would be right next to these other completely different and radically bespoke properties. So when we started looking at mansions in Los Angeles, it started digitally scouting, again, because of COVID. So I kind of looked at all the location services and the properties that were available for filming in Los Angeles. And between online catalogs and some in-person visits, I probably looked at over 200 mansions before we found the one that we picked. And the one that we picked was done through some Google Earth trolling. I started just flying over Bel Air because we needed to find an estate that was stately, but also had like a lot of grounds. So I kind of flew over and I found this one property, and the aerial photography was dated like 2015 or something. And I'm like, look at this one. And so I passed it on to our location manager, Kyle Suker. And he went out to shoot photography, kind of paparazzi style from the street, to find that it was still under construction in 2020. But when he looked up the information of the owners, it happened to be someone that he was familiar with from other properties that he had filmed out of theirs. And we got an introduction. And when I walked onto the property, albeit not complete, there was enough done that I could see it. And I immediately felt like this is definitely Deborah. There was a kind of an architectural layout to the ground plan that I wanted to do called enfilade, which is done in a lot of classic European architecture where you have formal archways and openings that line up with each other. Mm-hmm. So when you walk into a grand space, one archway that looks into the living room is an archway that leads to the hallway, which is an archway that leads to the office. So kind of this frame within a frame. And it really allows for great cinematic use because you can get insane depth and wonderful sightlines. And connectivity and tissue through the house. And this house had the exact layout that I had sketched on a little scribble when I had kind of dreamed up what her house would be before we found it. And through the unbelievable talents of our construction and greens team, we finished the first floor exterior with, we brought in columns that we finished and landscaping and gravel for the driveway. And then I did some conceptual paint overs of what the second floor would look like, and visual effects kind of helped us finish off the second floor for the wider establishing shots. But I'm glad the producers and the creators went on the wild journey of like the gamble that was this house, but I think it really paid off in the end.
Another one of like the marquee pieces of the show is obviously like the Vegas stage where she performs, and sort of did you use an actual like Vegas? How did that work?
Yeah, so you know, we used a real stage here in Los Angeles, and we looked at a few stages because we wanted to find the perfect balance of the right size house. So about 1,000-person house. You know, she's not the Celine Dion headliner with an amphitheater, but she still we want a sizable theater. And you know, we knew we wanted the Palmetto to kind of be what was once an upscale hotel that might be kind of seeing some of its older days and still trying to find a relevancy, much like Deborah. So that's why we were drawn towards the more like Italian Riviera style of the Palmetto. And we found a location here in Los Angeles, the Biltmore Hotel, that we converted into the casino. The theater is the Wilshire Ebell, another historic property in Los Angeles that we used for the actual stage work. And as she kind of weaved her way through the stage to the backstage, visual effects married the shots together. So it was one seamless oneer, but the stage is one location. The white hallways leading to her dressing room is another location. And then the actual dressing room was a build on stage. So that one shot traveled through multiple spaces that visual effects connected together as one continuous shot. So it felt as if it was all in one space.
Cool. Did you do anything to the production design to sort of show that kind of like aginess of the hotel? Did you sort of like?
Yeah, we you know, there were a couple cues that we took from it in the sense that you know, the rooms were not quite updated. So you really see that in Ava's hotel room and sort of the underbelly of the casino. So where she has to go in episode 2 for the cafeteria, and even simple notes like the slot machines were all slightly older. We had a few contemporary ones in certain areas, but you know, they're updating their slot machines, but the areas that Ava was in was still kind of like the senior citizen area. They're not quite prone to the tap cards yet. So they're still using the quarters. And so, you know, there's still a whole abundance catering to maybe some of the older crowd. I think probably the best example I can give of trying to show a little bit of the age of the casino that I could control from the ground up would be Deborah's dressing room. And the way I looked at it was Deborah is a fierce businesswoman, and she probably crafted the contract as is scripted in a couple dialogue exchanges with Marty, the casino owner, to the 10th degree. And so I kind of had this vision where when she first was building her dressing room, she had all these demands put into her contract just because she could. So she wanted a sunken living room in her dressing room. So that's why when you come into the foyer space, you have to go up a set of stairs, because they had to loft the entire interior of the dressing room so she could have a sunken dressing room, sunken living room. And that was sort of an attempt to show a power play. So her guests must sit down below and she stands above and talks to them. So when she brings the reporter into the space, you know, he goes down to the sunken living room and she'll come down to his level to meet him. She's always wary of the press and what they've done to her in the past. So it's a power dynamic that she's able to control through the design of her dressing room and then how she utilizes the space. But seeing as how the casino is pushing Deborah out, they're not taking big strides to keep her dressing room the latest and greatest. So you see layers and layers of paint roped up on the walls. They're not sanding it and smoothing it. It's kind of a, you know, tenant turnover where the landlord comes in and just keeps on slapping a fresh coat of paint over the old one. So you start to see the cracks and the age in some of the walls. And it's similar to like how Deborah is constantly applying the stage makeup to her aging face.
Oh, wow. That's a great anecdote. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was
okay.
into your story. And are there any sort of like Easter egg? Well, we'll kind of go area by area, but are there any sort of Easter egg things like blink if you miss it, sort of little details that you included that you can tell me about?
Yeah, there's so many. um, One that I know that Jean was particularly fond of was in her living room. I should start by saying like that the way the house was sort of designed was that the downstairs was kind of the like slightly flashier, showy Deborah, kind of the space you would expect Deborah to inhabit. Um, the colors are a little stronger, the angles are a little harder. There's a fierceness to a lot of furniture. It's like a lot of iron that comes to points or hard edged chairs. There's a slight level of comfort, but after you sit for a little while, like you don't feel like you want to be there and you leave. She doesn't let you into her space too long. The artwork is contemporary, loud, and flashy, and this is the side of Deborah that she wants you to see. Um, in fact, it's her armor, and there was a piece of armor sitting in her front foyer by the front door, like an old chest plate. Um, and so she uses this space to take what people think of her and basically recraft it into her own version of that interpretation, which is kind of how she's constantly rebranded herself, as building her strength up from the criticism. And so in the living room, there's a decorative molding that runs right above the chair rail. So it's about like chair height. And it has a bunch of leaves. My idea was that the downstairs is kind of the bushes of the rose bush, the thorny, leafy area that you're allowed to be in the garden, where the upstairs is more like the flower petals that she doesn't let very many people into. And when you unfold those petals, you really see the true Deborah inside. So downstairs, the moldings had a lot of acanthus, which is a lot of leaf decoration. And in that chair rail staffing, each leaf was interspersed with a tongue, kind of sticking it out.
Oh, cool.
And the idea from this was in one of the flashbacks when Ava was watching the old tapes in her pilot for the stand-up late night show, she makes a comment that my accountant didn't even know what to call me, so he put mouthy broad. So it was her way of claiming that criticism and throwing it right back of, I'm such a successful mouthy broad, I can put a tongue on my wall, like hand carved. And so, the difference when you go upstairs is the furniture becomes softer, more enveloping, more luxurious. There's furs, 12 pillows on her bed. All the couches and the recliners are like soft, upholstered arms. And this is where she relaxes and allows kind of the armor to come off. And no one's allowed to come up there. She gets extremely upset with Ava when she makes her way up without permission, because this is like really her true little captive sanctum. And even the art up there, it's more classic, not the contemporary, louder stuff downstairs, but it's Manets, Monets, Van Goghs, Rothkos. She's quite the collector. She's competing with her neighbor Steve Wynn. And even in the front door when you first walk in, and I don't even know if this ever made it on camera, but I do a lot of these things for Jean. There was a painting of a dead matador done by Manet. And it's kind of a warning to any man who even dares to set foot in her abode upstairs, like, you are fighting with a bull and you will lose. I think there might be one shot that you kind of see it as Marty exits after giving her the bad news, and I think episode, maybe it was 7 or 8.
There's like my favorite detail of her house is the the soda machine that she has in
Yeah.
How did you like have to like buy was that in the script? Like, how did that?
Yeah. So Lucia, Paul, and Jen have this like wonderful vision of Deborah. They've been creating her. I think they said the initial ideas started percolating around 2015. So they've spent years crafting who Deborah is. And so there were so many character moments that were built into the script that was an amazing foundation. And like the soda machine, for example, in the kitchen, the microwave in her office that she warms her coffee up in, those were all very specific scripted elements, and were quite fun to source. And we dabbled in the idea that maybe this is a new contemporary soda stream kind of built into a cabinet, but that just didn't feel right to Deborah. This is something that she probably had a dressing room in 96 in a comedy club that had this soda machine, and it was just near and dear to her. So she just took it with her. And same thing with the microwave. This used to be in another dressing room that she brought with her. And so she carries these mementos of her past with her, because much to her character portrayal, age on an object doesn't necessarily mean it's worthless. So carrying these antiquities with her, which I think is also beautifully displayed in the salt and pepper shaker display, which of course was another scripted element from episode 2. And when you kind of look at the variety of salt and pepper shakers that she has in there, there's little cowboy boots next to two bunnies going at it, next to like these very high-end, like beautiful antique pieces. So there's really a range in taste and acquisition that she kind of collects.
Did you have to hunt down those salt and pepper shakers yourself?
I will give full credit on that to the set decorator, Ellen Reed Doros, and our prop master, Gabe Perello. Knowing that this was an element that was needed from the very beginning, they started the search right at the beginning of development. And it was antique mall shopping, eBay, scouring a lot of the antique sites. The hero one was a custom fabrication that Gay created, hand painted. But there was a lot of fun in acquiring those, and there's kind of an absurd culture in that collection realm that I didn't even know about that we unearthed. So it was fun. I mean, there were a few that we weren't able to actually use just because of clearance concerns.
Yeah.
My favorite that never was able to be made was an actual like Salt and Peppa, like the band.
Oh,
Would have been amazing, but it'll live in infamy in our gold room.
Have you heard anything about season 2? Is that
it's been picked up.
Yeah.
So they will start production toward the end of this year, and filming, I believe the plan is starting next year, which I'm so happy to hear.
Are you going to be involved? Do you know yet?
Right now my availability is precluding me from it because I'm on another show that films through the end of the year. So it pains me. And if there's any schedule changes, I would jump at the chance in a hot second.
Let's see what other areas we haven't covered. That's something, something so interesting that you mentioned is sort of like the dichotomy between like the newness and the aging and like the older elements. Like, was that mostly scripted, and how did you sort of decide like which areas to sort of age and where to sort of lean into like modern?
I don't know that they were necessarily scripted. It kind of evolved as a very fluid conversation that I had early on with Paul, Jen, and Lucia. They were really great in that they would give me some specific references, but for the most part, they asked me to kind of like create a board and bring it to them. So like with the mansion, they didn't share any references with me. All I knew was that it was supposed to be a French estate. And like comments like the Cheesecake Factory and tassels on the couch for Liberace comments. So when I created my mood board, and then Paul, Jen, and Lucia had created theirs, and we shared them together on the same day, we had so many of the same very obscure references. It was kind of this like synchronicity that I've never experienced, and it was like amazing and really scary at the same time.
What was the most like obscure one that you guys both had on your board?
I mean, it was like color palettes were really similar. I had selected a interior design firm that I thought would have been perfect for Deborah because it's Atelier AM. They're based out of Los Angeles, and they've actually done an estate in Las Vegas that I was looking at that was amazing. And they just do this beautiful balance of mixing antiquity with contemporary objects. Like there's this great balance. And that was something that I wanted with Deborah. Like everything in her life is a balance of balance and imbalance. I know that's like a lot of the same word being used, but so it's, there's a formal symmetry in all of her spaces, but it's not necessarily made by a mirror image. So like if you have a tall object on one side of the room, it's balanced by a tall object on the other side of the room, but one might be like in her living room, for example, when you're looking out to her office, you have a contemporary painting over a Rococo like gold console with zebra poofs below it and like neoclassical lamps. So you just mixed seven styles and time periods all together. But on the right side, it's balanced with like a beautiful chinoiserie. Ellen's really much better at saying these things than I am. Like hutch with contemporary art above that. So it was this balance that you constantly played a waiting game, but using objects that wouldn't necessarily traditionally go together. So, and I think in terms of like, to your point about like the old versus the new, I mean, that's something that is just the bones of this show. And these two women from different generations, from different socioeconomic statuses, and two different areas of the industry, generational areas. It was like inherent in just like the storyline. So supporting it with the aesthetic and the visuals was, I think, my strongest request, like the need I needed to fulfill the most. And I loved the ability that they allowed us to do in episode 2, where Adam Bricker, the director of photography, and Lucia kind of structured this montage where you would start with Deborah and then show the corresponding of Ava, and you walked through their lives and contrasted that. And it wasn't Ava's life necessarily in LA, it was her Vegas and the place that Deborah put her in Vegas, but that's what she could afford and that's where she had to be. And I tried to do that also with colors between the two. So Deborah had her color palette and Ava had her color palette. Deborah's being like pink, like dusty pinks and sages, and Ava being kind of light blues and mustardy oranges, kind of to complement her hair. And the reason for those two color palette assignments was, when you look at the color wheel, like green and red are considered contrasting colors, and blue and orange are considered contrasting colors. But if you dilute them with a little bit of white and desaturate them, those two highly contrasting colors become harmonious. So each of them have turmoil, but they found balance in it. And the two of those palettes don't necessarily work well with each other until you do that same levels adjust. So the first time you see those color palettes starting to merge together is episode 6 and 7, Graces, in the recovery suite. So, Ava's kind of subjugated mostly to the living room in the beginning of that space, and Deborah's in her throne bed in the recovery bedroom. And so in the living room, it's kind of this teal wallpaper, which is Ava's color, with dusty pink curtains, that is Deborah's color. And in the bedroom where Deborah is, it's pink wallpaper, which is her color, and teal curtains. So it's the opposite. So it's, as they're kind of both moving through the spaces and finding commonalities and comfort and humor in each other, the colors are starting to like merge together. And really tried to bring this home in the final episode where Deborah visits Ava at her childhood home. So in her bedroom, we created a custom wallpaper that was kind of a very pale blue, because it's kind of showing like the binary gender neutrality of Ava. Like she would have had a blue bedroom because you expect a girl to have a pink bedroom, but this is Ava and she's crafted her narrative. But populated within that blue wallpaper are tiny little pink flowers. So it's the idea of the floral from Deborah's bedroom being, personified within Ava. So you have the color balance, the textural balance, like all of that is starting to come together. And even though Ava's wallpaper was selected 20 years ago by her mom, probably, it was just a nice motif, just from like a kind of a superficial level that I felt kind of brought us full circle.